Hello, this is a tutorial about the text animators in After Effects and hopefully will give you a pretty clear idea about what you can do with them. I'll show this with a few examples, and let's start with a really simple Typewriter animation. I'll make a new comp and name it Typewriter. Full HD resolution and 3 seconds in duration, or something like that. Let's start by making a text layer, write some text on it. Let's center it and center the pivot as well. A handy trick for when you have lots of text compositions in a project and want to maybe rename them quickly or duplicate new ones out of the existing ones, you can have the text layer use the name of the composition for the text by alt-clicking the source text stopwatch and writing this comp.name. Now we are ready to add some animation on it. Expand the text layer, and on the text foldout there's this animate arrow here. Let's add opacity animator. It adds a range selector and the property itself inside the animator, and we can change the opacity to 0. And now we can see how it affects by changing these values for the range. We have a start and end value which only go from 0 to 100, and an offset value which goes from -100 to 100. And this offset slider or value is actually the most convenient way to animate this, because it works much better together with the ramp up and ramp down shape options. So we'll be mainly using that. But anyway, let's go to 1 second and add a keyframe for the offset to 100, and then in frame 0 add a keyframe to 0. Now we have the text getting revealed, but they fade in letter by letter, and I want the smoothness to be gone because it's Typewriter effect. So we have this smoothness value here. We'll go to the advanced settings in more depth later, but I'll just set the smoothness to 0, and now those letters just appear suddenly. We might want to add a character at the end, like an understroke or something like that. We could do that by adding another animator. When you're adding it, be sure that you have none of these other animators selected, or it adds the property as a new property inside an existing animator. So I have this text folder selected, and I click on that arrow again, and character value is the property we want for the new one. Actually, to make things easier, I'll go back to the previous animator, and from the advanced properties I'll change units to index. This means that what we select here means the indexes of the letters. So now there would be 4 characters visible, and so on. Indexes are from 1 upwards, so it changed the 100% automatically to 10 because we have 10 letters here. On the second animator, we can first try this character value to see where the understroke would be, but I happen to remember it's 95 because it's pretty slow to look for it, so I'll just fill it there. And then we'd need only the last character of the typewriter range selector to be changed into an understroke. So we'd basically want the same range as this transparent part here has, but one character added to that. So for that reason I'll first do the same change on this second animator, choosing index for that as well as the unit, and then copy the offset value from the other selector by using the big whip. There. Now it's copied, but we can't see it because that character is invisible. So we just add -1 to the end. Oh yeah, I had that animator hidden, so that's why it was visible. So now there's a lot of letters because before it gets changed to the underscore. We can fix that by setting the smoothness to 0 again. Now it's just an underscore that follows the end of the word, but it stops before it should, so we can fix this by just changing this last keyframe of the previous animator to 11. But there is a preset for Typewriter as well, a really good one that comes with After Effects. So now that we've done this by hand, I'll show you that as well. There's a bunch of presets, and by looking through them you can get a pretty good idea also of what can be done with the text animators. In most cases, in my opinion, it's clearest to start from scratch. That way what you do is the most modifiable by you, because you know the reasons of why things are there and how you've added them. But this is a very handy looking preset. You can change the cursor shape there to an underscore or whatever you want out of the options, and change the blink speed and remove the cursor if you want to. Anyway, that's the typewriter. Then we can make a smoother text reveal. I'll just duplicate the composition and name it Smooth Reveal. I'll remove this new layer and switch back to the old one and remove the animators we've added there to start from scratch. So let's add an animator for scale this time. I'll change the property to 0. And once again I'll animate the offset to go from 0 to 100. So it scales up the letters one by one, but there's no real easing to it. So to add that, we'll have to dig deeper to the advanced settings. We already talked about the units. Percentage is really handy if you have a long text and or several text layers that you want to use the same animations on. And you don't necessarily want to change the length of the end value rather, and offset for each one separately. Then the percentage unit is really handy. And then we have based on setting. You can have the text appear word by word or line by line, as well as character at a time. After that, there's mode. If you have several range selectors stacked on top of each other, the mode on the lower ones determines how the effect of those get combined together. So if the lower one would have subtract, it would subtract from the range of the one above it, and so on. Min and max, I have experimented with these, but it doesn't really seem to make any sense to me. I can achieve what I want to achieve, but I don't really know why the values work the way they do. Then we have amount slider, which does pretty much the same as just changing the property. So with this add mode that I usually use, I just prefer to change the property itself rather than the amount, but with the other modes the amount has more of a role. Then there's the shape setting. Ramp up would allow us to reveal the text from the beginning to the end, but with more smoothness. Ramp down would be the other way, kind of from the end to the beginning, if we look at the animation backwards. Then these last three are pretty similar with each other, but in this case, affecting the scale, they would first make the letter smaller and then bigger. This probably makes more sense with a subtract mode here, so it shows them for a moment there. And you could, for example, use this with color property to achieve some kind of a light sweep or something like that. Round and smooth are just smoother versions of the same thing. For this smooth reveal, we'll be going with ramp up. We have to swap the keyframes with each other, because apparently it needs to start from 100 and no, actually it's because I changed the mode to subtract. I'll change it back to add, so now we can have these make more sense. So it starts from -100 and ends up at 100. We can also add some easing. Ease low would be the same as ease in. So now it appears nicely, and ease high would be ease out. So you can see it slowly getting bigger at first. And then there's a steeper speed curve in the middle at the moment, but I'll change ease high to 0, so there's only that ease in. So there we have our smooth reveal. We could also randomize the order of the letters getting revealed from there and change the random seed for that. Next we can look into the expression selectors. I'll duplicate this typewriter comp again and write expression selectors. remove this top layer again. Use the old one. Remove the animators. I'll make it a bit smaller so that it fits on one line. I'll start by doing pretty much the same animation as the last time, but with an expression, and with that I can also add some bounce to the scale of the letters. So the way to do that would be to add a scale animator, and we'll remove the range selector and click on this small button here and add an expression selector. We can set the scale to 0 to see what it does, and by default it just makes the last letters gradually smaller. We'll need a couple of sliders to animate this. I'll add a couple of slider control effects to this layer, name them. First one can be reveal, and the second one letter delay, or frame delay actually. I'll set frame delay to 2, and the reveal property can be at 100 in the first frame, and let's set a keyframe to 1 second. It will be 0 in value, so it goes from 100 to 0. Now we'll link the expression to these sliders. In the expression selector, let's remove the text that was added by default. We need a variable called delay. This comp dot frame duration times text index, which is the index of the letter, times. And let's use the big whip to get the frame delay value, and close the line with a semicolon. To the next line we need to use the big whip again and get the reveal value dot value at time minus delay. So now we have the keyframes of the slider affecting the text getting revealed. We can change the delay value to have them appear closer together, or maybe 5 frames would be good. That's very slow. I'll change it back to 3. We can change these keyframes however we want, and even make them like minus something, or well, apparently over 100 doesn't do anything, but in a way we could add a bit of bounce by having a keyframe in the middle that is maybe minus 20 or something. Now there's a bit of bounce to it, and if you want to make it even a lot bouncier, you could use an expression for that. This is just something I've copied from the net, and I've used the same one so many times. I'll add the link to the description. I'll change these keyframes to linear ones so you can see its effect at its purest. But you can use the same bounce expression on whatever property like scale and rotation and position and whatever. The default values it looks like that, but you can change the settings to make it a bit more subtle or slower or whatever. So you can pretty much change the whole nature of the animation with really quickly by tweaking the values. Let's try another example of an expression you can add. Let's add a new animator. Set the fill color property for that. I'll use RGB. Changes everything to red, but remove the range selector and add the expression selector instead. So I'll make every other character red by using a simple expression. If text index %2 is 1. So this means that when we divide text index, the index of the letter, by 2, if the remainder is 1, then do this. The effect of this property will be 0, and otherwise it will be 100%. You can also add as many properties to the same animator as you want. So we could make these red characters maybe rotate a bit. Let's add some blur to them. But yeah, you get the idea. You can change the look very easily by adjusting these keyframes and the delay value. Then let's try combining selectors. I'll use the same starting point again, duplicate this Typewriter component. Type combining selectors as the name. Remove these two animators again. And I'll make the text smaller, and one thing we could do is have the text fade in smoothly from the beginning, and at the same time have the position of the characters be random in the beginning and get more orderly as the text gets revealed. So let's try something like that. First, I'll add the opacity animation. I'll use the same ramp up shape that we already used once. Oops. There, set the E slow to 100 and animate the offset from -100 to 100. Change the property so that it does something too. Now I'll add a new animator for the position property to scatter the letters as they get revealed. I'll remove this range selector and add the weekly selector instead. This has its own settings as well. Let's first change the position property. You can set the X and Y separately, but I'll just use the Y for this one. With random seed you can change the whole look. With log dimensions, if you'd have scale property, that would log the width and height to be animated the same way, so the scale is kind of not as wonky. I'll remove the scale option now, scale property. Spatial phase and temporal phase. I don't really know what these are specifically, but they seem to bounce them around, perhaps in a bit different way than the wiggles per second by itself would do. The correlation setting affects whether it randomizes the positions as a single sweeping curve rather than very randomly. So closer to 100 would be more of an even curve. Closer to 0 is something that I'm after with this one. Wiggles per second is the speed, but I'll set it to 0 for now. There's the max and min amount, which just affects what the limits are, how much it animates to this positive direction and to the negative 100% as well. I only want the text to be randomized in the very beginning of the letters as they fade in, then get to their correct positions right after that. So I'll add the range selector underneath the weekly selector. And since I want to subtract from the effect of the weekly selector, I'll change that to the mode subtract. Now by animating the offset slider we can see how it changes, but I'll use the ramp up version for this one as well. It should maybe start from 0 instead of 100. I'll add some kind of easing, whichever is the correct one, and that looks better. I think it's going the wrong way though. Alright, now it looks a lot better. More like what I was after anyway. Well, anyway, you can see the weekly selector affecting until the range selector reduces its effect. It's a bit of fiddling around to get this working the way you want them, because the settings aren't very intuitive to me, at least. You can usually bend things to your will if you just give it a while. With the min and max selector, it's just a matter of trying them out and fiddling with the controls to try to get them to do what you want. I don't really understand why things work the way they work, but by setting the values like this, I got the first part of the letters that are randomized by this weekly selector here to have their minimum at the base of the word, and the second half, which is affected by this, have their maximum at the top of the normal height of the word. To do this, I had to set the amount to one of them to -100 and of the other to 100. Don't really know why it is that way, but it seems to be just a matter of testing them out until they do what you want them to. Anyway, that's it for combining selectors. Let's do one more example composition. Call it card flip. I'll add a new text layer and write card flip. I'll change it to all caps from here. Maybe a bit bigger. I'll align it to the center and then set the pivot to the center as well. At the top of this animate arrow menu, we have enable per character 3D, and that allows us to rotate and move each letter in space. So let's start by adding some rotation animation. Let's set X rotation to 90. We can change the offset a bit. You can see how they rotate from the base rather than the center. We can fix that by going to more options and changing the grouping alignment. For the values here, I'll again pick the ramp up and set E slow to 100. And then animate the offset from -100 to 100. But we can add a lot more rotation animation by adding 2 in the beginning there, so 2 whole rounds plus 90 degrees. We can add an exit animation as well, and since this is a 3D example, let's add some position animation. Oh no, now I added it to the same animator, but I'll select the text fold out and then add the position animation. I'll set it to move to the distance. I'll put 3000 as the Z value. I'll have it start from the end this time, so I'll use ramp down and set ease high this time to 100. From offset slider. So this one is one I want to animate. Start from -100. At the end it can be 100. So it moves to the distance like that. I'll add the opacity property in the same animator so it disappears entirely. Set it to 0. I think the easing would look better the other way around though, so I'll remove the ease high and set ease low to 100. Now we got some 3D movement there, but we can also add extrusion to the text. First you have to make sure you have either Advanced 3D or Cinema 4D selected here. I use the Advanced 3D. With that selected, you have geometry options and material options here visible. You can add some extrusion depth, maybe change the bevel style to convex, which gives a nice smooth rounding to the edges. And these react to lights as well, so I'll add a couple of lights. Maybe text could be shinier. So from the material options I'll change the specular shininess. So that was the last example. There's a lot of values to tweak and a lot of settings to experiment with, but once you got the hang of these, I think text animators are really versatile, whatever you want to do with them, and very easy to copy paste from one text layer to another. Alright, thanks for watching.